This is the effect of Donald Trump's tariffs. I'm going to show you a pretty bad one right here. This is on child's clothes. You can see they ripped off the bottom. That's what it's supposed to look like, $6.98. These are up to $10.98 now. That is a $4 increase.
In the early hours of August 7, 2025, President Donald Trump activated his long-planned global tariff package. Duties of 10 to 50% on more than 90 countries, pushing the average U.S. import rate above 17%, the highest since the Great Depression. Canada was already on his list. Since August 1st, a higher tariff tier has applied to Canadian goods outside USMCA rules, part of a broader offensive that also targeted the European Union, India, Brazil, and Mexico. The intent was straightforward: hit multiple partners at once and extract faster concessions. But as the weeks unfolded, the strain began to boomerang back on the U.S. economy.
Prices are starting to rise for American consumers as President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs on nearly all imported goods are kicking in.
The price shock came from the package as a whole, not just Canada. According to Cox Automotive, new car prices are projected to climb 4 to 8% in 2025. Even Ford, with most of its assembly in the U.S., has paid about $1 billion in tariff costs and raised prices on Mexico-built models. Yale's Budget Lab estimates shoe prices will surge 40% and clothing 38% as tariffs on Vietnam and India squeeze global sportswear brands. Procter & Gamble confirmed in late July it will raise household product prices by single-digit percentages after months of trying to hold the line. Imported staples, olive oil from Europe, Brazilian coffee now under a 50% tariff, and aluminum from Mexico for beer cans are all climbing. Some importers initially absorbed the cost, but retailers warn thin margins won't hold. Walmart has signaled that higher shelf prices are inevitable, while smaller stores feel the pinch sooner. Inflationary pressure is now combining with Trump's push for lower interest rates, raising concerns over a double whammy on consumer prices.
With the looming threat of U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs, a Buy Canadian movement has picked up across the country. You may have noticed it when you go into grocery stores or supply shops, a tag that tells you if the product you're about to pick up is made in Canada.
As the global tariff wave began to push up costs in the United States, Ottawa seized the moment to strengthen its negotiating position. Prime Minister Mark Carney held firm on Canada's 25% retaliatory tariffs, targeting U.S. goods tied to influential industries. By keeping that pressure in place, Canada ensured the discomfort was registered not just by corporations, but by lawmakers in Washington.
And I still have to get a can of Campbell's soup that's putting that Canadian flag on, that's not being manufactured here, misleading the people. They're going to rip that label off and encourage people to buy made in Ontario, made in Canada soup.
At home, Ontario Premier Doug Ford amplified the strategy. His push for clear origin labeling and his public criticism of companies outsourcing production showed a united political front committed to protecting domestic industry. These moves weren't only about internal policy. They signaled to the U.S. that Canada's leadership was aligned and prepared to act in defense of its interests. Meanwhile, Canada accelerated trade diversification toward the EU, UK, and Mexico, reducing dependence on the U.S. market precisely as American import costs were climbing. The combination of targeted tariffs, domestic unity, and new trade channels turned a defensive posture into a calculated offense, allowing Canada to press its advantage while Trump faced growing economic pressure at home. Trump began August with an aggressive trade play, expecting quick compliance from partners. Instead, his global tariff web has spread economic pressure across U.S. industries and households, while Canada has held steady. By maintaining its countermeasures, reinforcing domestic production, and diversifying export markets, Ottawa has positioned itself as an active player, not a subordinate. The contest is now a measured standoff. The U.S. wields market scale, Canada holds supply chain and resource leverage. The final outcome remains uncertain, but one fact is clear. The tariffs designed to force Canada into retreat have instead created a more balanced battlefield where Ottawa can negotiate from strength and shape the terms of the next move.
35% tariff is now in place on some Canadian goods. And one Canadian industry that Washington has taken particular issue with is dairy.
In early August 2025, President Donald Trump took another step in his aggressive trade strategy. He raised tariffs on Canadian non-USMCA goods from 25% to 35%, escalating tensions at the border. Although the dairy sector itself is not directly hit by these new tariffs, Canada's dairy supply management system has long been a thorn in Trump's side. For years, he has portrayed it as an unfair barrier that protects Canadian farmers while limiting U.S. access to the market. Now, with broader tariffs in place and trade talks under strain, the question is whether Trump can force change in a policy Canada has vowed to defend at all costs.
Supply management is designed to protect dairy farms. There are limits to how much Canadian dairy farms can produce and how much from the United States can be imported to Canada.
Canada's supply management controls how much dairy is produced domestically and how much foreign product can enter the market. Imports from the U.S. are capped at roughly 3.5% of Canada's dairy market. If that limit is exceeded, tariffs skyrocket, 241% on milk and nearly 298.5% on butter, according to the Canadian Border Services Agency. The system has been in place for over 6 decades, designed to keep prices stable and protect thousands of family-run farms from being outcompeted by massive U.S. operations that can house tens of thousands of cows.
The dairy industry falls under CUSMA regulations, but U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly complained, saying it's an unfair deal for his country's producers.
From Washington's perspective, this is the very definition of a trade barrier. American producers already send about $800 million worth of dairy products to Canada annually, while Canada exports roughly $300 million in dairy south of the border. To Trump and his allies, the limits, and the high tariffs beyond them, mean lost opportunities for U.S. farmers. Just weeks before these latest tariff increases, Canada's Parliament passed legislation that forbids using supply management as a bargaining chip in future trade negotiations. The bill enjoyed cross-party support, with advocates pointing to past trade deals where portions of the market were conceded despite political promises to protect it. Now, any government that wants to change the system would have to repeal the law and pay a steep political price. This protection isn't just about Quebec, the heartland of Canadian dairy. Farmers in British Columbia, Alberta, and even the Northwest Territories see supply management as essential for economic stability. It's a rare national consensus in an often divided political landscape. Canadian officials, including Prime Minister Mark Carney, know what's at stake. Loosening supply management too far could allow foreign dairy to take up to 18% of the domestic market, a level that industry groups warn would undermine the system entirely. That could mean farm closures, job losses, and declining rural economies. Beyond defending dairy, Canada has leverage of its own. The U.S. relies heavily on Canadian energy, critical minerals, and integrated auto supply chains. These sectors give Ottawa bargaining power that extends far beyond milk and butter. In trade talks, it's not just about defending one industry. It's about maintaining a balanced, mutually beneficial agreement. Trump may have expected the same playbook to work here as it has elsewhere: apply tariffs, demand changes, and secure a quick win. Instead, Canada's legal safeguards and political unity have slowed the process to a crawl. The dairy sector remains protected, with Ottawa signaling it is ready to walk away from a bad deal rather than concede on supply management. Meanwhile, U.S. dairy producers still face oversupply, volatile prices, and stiff competition abroad. Higher tariffs on other Canadian goods risk hurting American importers more than they help U.S. farmers, a reminder that not every bluff works in Washington's favor.
And I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
The Trump 2.0 administration focusing on let's buy Greenland again, let's take it over, we're not going to rule out military force.
Donald Trump's second term has reignited a fixation that dates back to 2019. Greenland. This time, it's not just a headline-grabbing remark about buying the island. It's a sustained strategy to secure influence over one of the world's richest untapped sources of critical minerals. For the United States, those resources, especially rare earth elements, are a lifeline in a supply chain still dominated by China. Trump frames Greenland as both a national security necessity and an economic opportunity, placing it at the center of his administration's global resource agenda.
He says the island is vital for America's future security. It's also full of rare earth minerals. To guarantee access to these precious materials, Trump wants to buy Greenland.
Greenland's deposits of rare earths, molybdenum, and other critical materials are valued in the billions. These are the backbone of technologies from fighter jets to wind turbines. In June 2025, Greenland granted a 30-year permit for an EU-backed project to mine molybdenum, used to strengthen steel in defense, aerospace, and clean energy. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, China produced about 40% of the world's molybdenum in 2024 and controls 95 to 97% of midstream rare earth refining. Earlier this year, Beijing cut exports of key metals in response to Trump's tariffs, forcing U.S. automakers like Ford to halt production at plants in Chicago and Louisville within weeks. For Trump, Greenland is one of the few viable routes to break China's dominance. His tactics have mixed public bravado, insisting the U.S. must have Greenland, with behind-the-scenes deal-making. Australian firm Energy Transition Minerals has invested over $150 million in mapping the Tanbreeze rare earth deposit, considered one of the largest globally. Yet the challenges are formidable. No port, no roads, Arctic weather that can ground flights for days, and ore types never processed at commercial scale. Even so, U.S. investor interest remains high. For Trump's allies, the payoff, secure supply chains for the West, justifies the persistence.
You cannot buy us. We are not for sale.
Greenland's position under Trump's gaze mirrors Canada's recent experience.
If I may, as you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
Trump once teased Canada with the idea of making it America's 51st state, a remark that grabbed headlines but also reflected his style of applying political and trade pressure. In 2025, the U.S. raised tariffs on Canadian non-USMCA goods from 25% to 35%, targeting sectors from lumber to machinery. Prime Minister Mark Carney avoided rushing into concessions, coordinating with provincial leaders like Doug Ford to maintain a united stance. The aim was clear: resist bad deals while protecting domestic industries. This stance aligns Canada with other players navigating similar U.S. pressure. The EU's partnership with Greenland secures non-Chinese supplies of critical minerals, including molybdenum, through long-term contracts with European firms. Canadian mining interests, such as Greenland Resources' Malmbjerg project, are part of the same supply chain shift. By coordinating investments and policy, Canada, the EU, and Greenland can reduce dependence on both U.S. and Chinese market swings. For Ottawa, it's a way to protect sovereignty and economic stability. For Greenland, it's a path to development without tying itself to a single power. For Brussels, it's a hedge against geopolitical risk. In Trump's view, Greenland is not optional, it is essential. Its minerals could free the West from China's grip, and its location, just 1,200 miles from the U.S. East Coast, makes it a strategic outpost between Russia, China, and North America. But securing that prize will not be simple. Canada is leveraging alliances and its own resource base. The EU is embedding Greenland in its strategic materials plan, and Greenland's leaders are weighing outside offers against environmental standards and autonomy. The contest over Greenland's resources is part of a broader realignment in the Arctic and North Atlantic. Whether Trump's mix of pressure and negotiation will bring Greenland closer to Washington or push it toward a multilateral coalition remains uncertain. What is clear is that the race for Arctic resources has moved beyond speculation. Deals are being signed, alliances are forming, and decisions made in Nuuk, Ottawa, Brussels, and Washington will shape not just the region's future, but the balance of power in critical minerals for decades to come.